Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Wendy Folsom. She is a veteran story artist, podcast producer, and we've learned from her about powerful games, tips, and tools to raise resilient kids, improve conversations, and reduce screen time. We learn how to use stories to spark joy and build deeper bonds at home and beyond. Welcome to the show, Wendy.
Thank you, AJ. Thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form, Wendy. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll learn from you about how storytelling can connect and inspire, especially within families and also outside. So we'll learn all that. But before that, let's learn a bit about your background, your journey, so that people know who they are listening to.
Thank you. Well, I've been telling stories for over 20 years, and in schools and in concerts and just all over. I eventually went to Eastern Tennessee State University and got my master's in storytelling there as well. And I then ended up being a podcast producer, and I work with 3 different storytelling based podcasts. And I'm kind of excited today to be with you here in India, because we have a lot of listeners for the Appleseed, which is our storytelling performance CD. We bring in storytellers from all over the world into our studios. We record them in front of an audience, and then we package those into episodes. And we get a lot of listeners from your area of the world. So hello, India. We're really excited to be here. And then we do an audio adventure podcast called Kaboom, which is geared for like middle schoolers. And then just this week, we released Wink, Stories for Better Bedtimes, which is a beautiful thing for young children. Storyteller Stephanie Roth tells an engaging story, but then also does some mindfulness moments after that, where the kids can interact with the story with stretches and breathing and things that really design, especially to lessen anxiety, to calm the children and get them ready to go to sleep. And we also invite the parents. They can certainly put the episode on for the kids to listen to by themselves, but we give them little tips of, if they stay and listen with their kids for about 15 minutes, these ways that they can connect with their kids as they're helping them get ready for sleep. So it's really, I love working with storytelling. It's so powerful.
Absolutely, Wendy. Absolutely. So, it's fascinating that children, you can't take away the phone from them, but they can also use phones or whatever medium to listen to such platforms and stories. What is it that you push into your stories that kids stick to them, and rather than, leave those things? Because kids can get distracted very easily, and to keep them to a particular audio or podcast or, any sort of, you have got now Wink also, stories for better bed, all these things coming up. So I want to understand that mindset. How do you create those stories for children in audio format or any other format?
Yes. So, and with Wink, we were trying to decide in the beginning, should this be a video podcast or just an audio podcast? And we really felt strongly from the beginning that we need to get our kids off of screens, at least relieve the amount of time on screens. So we went without that. Kids' stories are engaging. They have what's called a brain hook. So when you start into Once Upon a Time, and if you can grab them right from the beginning, there's a stimulus in our brain that grabs our attention, and then it activates curiosity and emotional centers. So those are the things that we remember when we have an emotional experience in a story. That's very powerful. And then that also activates our brain's reward system, which means dopamine. So, dopamine reels them in. And this is the way that we keep attention, because we are hardwired to listen to stories and to see ourselves in the stories, and it becomes an engaged, on a very deep level, it becomes an engagement. And so one of the ways that we can really strengthen our families is, we want to pass on good values, and we want to pass on principles to our children, but we don't experience life in principles. We experience life in stories. And there's whole cultures, like a lot of the Native Americans in America, a lot of the tribes don't punish their children typically. They tell a story. So all of a sudden, if you were caught doing something as a child, then you're going to get a story about a little chipmunk who kind of happened to be doing the same thing. And they'll see the consequences that happen. And that's just a really good way to pass on values to our kids without the scolding, without the punishment feeling that we get from that. We have so on the Appleseed, one of our favorite tellers is Donald Davis, and he's known throughout the world as probably our most premier storyteller, at least from America. And he had a father who told stories and also taught through stories a lot. So there was this one time where he and his brother found a cigarette and they wanted to go figure out how to smoke it. And he lived in rural North Carolina, so he went up. They snuck up into the barn loft, and they were starting to smoke the cigarette when the dad came in to milk the cows, and they hurried and put out the cigarette and stuffed it down between two boards in the floor. Well, to their horror, the hole went all the way through, and the cigarette literally dropped at their father's feet. But he didn't react, or they weren't even sure he saw it. And he milked the cows, and they didn't hear anything, but they were nervous all that evening. Like, did Dad see us? Are we in trouble? And right before bedtime, the dad said, "I've got a story to share with you." And they sat down, and he told a story that was almost identical to of his brothers when he was young, and were smoking a cigarette in a neighbor's barn loft, and they actually ended up burning the whole barn down. And at the end of the story, he says, "So how'd you like that story?" And the younger brother said, "I'm tired. I want to go to bed now." But they knew that their dad knew, and they knew that he was giving them a chance, but that they weren't likely to get a second chance. And boy, did they ever try smoking or having any fire in a barn ever again. Never. They never did. So that's kind of the power that stories can have as far as passing down good principles.
Absolutely. So, a lot of times parents struggle to talk to their children in a way, have conversations, family conversations in a way that can, bring everyone together. They can do a lot of things together, but stories have their own power. And when we talk of stories, bedtime stories is people generally remember. What is it that your stories have that power and parents are not able to create that connection through stories? Is it that they don't know stories, or is it children do not trust their stories? Maybe bedtime stories are different. How can parents create better conversations at home through stories?
Well, that's a great question. And, we have to kind of build a storytelling culture. And I didn't grow up in a storytelling culture. When I decided when my children were young that I wanted to become a storyteller, the truth of the matter was my husband was a better storyteller naturally than I was, because he grew up with a father who told a lot of stories. And I really didn't grow up in a family. We read a lot together, but nobody told stories. So I had to practice, but everyone can learn. It's such a human thing to be able to tell a story. I think in our culture today, we need to get some screen-free time. So you have to kind of figure out how you're going to carve that out. Now, I think bedtimes are a great time because kids are more motivated, it seems like, to talk at night. They don't want to have to go to bed. And they seem like they are more open to talking with parents at bedtime. But so having no screens and phones, if you've got a phone in the room, you're not going to get anyone's attention. So perhaps mealtime or some meal times, maybe Sunday night is a special time that families are going to spend together, and they're not going to have any screen time. In the car is a great time because you can put on these podcasts or you can talk to your kids. But if they have their phones, and they can have their phones, they're just going to put on the earbuds, and you're not going to get a conversation. So you can't take away, the screens all the time, but maybe you try out some different specific times that everyone's on understands that this is going to be a screen-free time. Meals would be the other great time. And then I'm you don't have to be a great performer, and I'm really first and foremost today talking about family stories. Like, there's been so many studies that say one of the things that builds resilience in kids the very most is knowing their family stories. Great grandpa came and immigrated to this area, so many years ago, and here's all the trouble he had. It doesn't even have to be stories that ended happily, because they know that those people survived, and it gives them strength and resilience in their own lives. And so those are really important stories. And then there's even been a more recent study that asked middle schoolers which kinds of stories shape who you think you are, your identity, building your identity. And it wasn't stories about friends. It wasn't their own personal stories. It was by far their family stories. Isn't that interesting? Like, I wouldn't have guessed that. But there's an impact of generational stories. I like to tell my kids about my grandma Park, who at a time when not a lot of women were working in her culture, she really almost begged her father to help her get through nursing school. And he finally relented, but he said, you have to, if I'm going to put you through nursing school, you have to promise that you're going to take care of this family's health needs your whole life. And she made that promise, and she took that promise so seriously. She ended up even delivering some of her younger siblings at home, being the midwife. And I would say even that grandma probably died keeping that promise, because her husband, my grandpa, had had a stroke, and she was caring for him at home alone, taking on all that responsibility, and it wore her out, and she ended up going first. But that's an important story for my daughters, because so we have family patterns that get passed down, right? And in my family, I think we have a bit of codependency. I think we have women who are almost a little subservient sometimes. But I would need to remind my children that we were also raised by strong women. Grandma went out and worked and had a full career as a nurse, again, in a time when not a lot of women were working. That's an important family story in my eyes and for my children. And it's not, don't be afraid of your difficult stories. Like, we need your difficult stories too. If you had addiction in your family, wouldn't that be an important thing to pass down and talk about and know about? And again, in my family, looking at family patterns that have been passed down that I don't particularly like, and I want to tell the stories about when the women in my family were strong.
Absolutely. So, talking of stories, you see, sometimes parent thinks that children need those, those different character stories, and that they don't know stories. So the maximum they can do is to get some books here and there, children's books and all. But what are the best stories for children, especially to keep that family strong, children resilient, bring a lot of joy to everyone? Is it about those, superhero stories, or is it about which story, and who is the one who should be telling those stories? You see, when children are very young, very small, they listen to all those stories from, humming and all that stuff from their mothers. But later on, they look at their dad for their stories, and their dad does not have that much of energy and time. I want to understand who are the best people for stories, what stories children expect, what stories parents should know at least, or where should they source their stories.
Yes. So everyone should be telling stories to children, I think. I think it should be in the schools. With the Appleseed, we take some of those stories and we create lesson plans for schools that our teachers are using all over. And because, again, there's so many embedded values in those stories. So first and foremost, again, tell your own stories to your children. I don't assume that they're not interested. If you tell stories about when you were their age, I'm pretty sure they're going to be interested. Now, don't make it heavy-handed, and don't drill down the lesson. Trust that the story has the power in and of itself, that you don't have to hammer home the message. You can let the story do that for you. But, beyond your own stories, folk tales and fairy tales are wonderful for younger children. And again, they have all of those senses of justice and kindness and goodness all wrapped up in those stories. When the kids get a little older, maybe middle school, middle ages, elementary school, I'm not sure if we use the same terminology, but your primary older kids, they love adventure stories. This is where you get into the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell's work. And that's where, superheroes can come in and be, awesome. But for me, superhero stories are a little difficult to pull off well, because when you have such a powerful character, how can we relate to that? My favorite superhero is Spider-Man, because he's just an angsty teenager and he's making lots of mistakes. I can relate to that. I can't relate to Superman and these other people that are so powerful. We know they're going to win in the end. And story is all about struggle. So choose stories that fit what your kids are going through. This is a really powerful idea. So with Stephanie, who's our Wink storyteller, one of the stories this first season is called Mommy versus Monster. And when her one boy was young, he was having such a hard time going to sleep because he was deathly afraid of monsters. For some reason, something had set him off to be afraid of monsters. So she actually wrote this story for him. The boy gets swallowed by a monster, like his worst fears come true in the story, but the mommy goes in after the boy. And inside the monster, the mommy and the boy fight the monster and they win. And this child stopped being afraid of monsters and started to be able to go to sleep again. So when you think about what are my kids, what are their fears, what are their struggles, is there a bully at school? Well, if there's a bully, tell Brer Rabbit stories, tell trickster stories about people who kind of pinch it to the giants, the bigger ones, the more powerful ones, and or dramas where you have the little guy, triumphing over the powerful system. And that's basically your hero's journey as well. So these are the kinds of stories that you can see that you can tailor fit for what your kids need to hear.
Absolutely, Wendy. So you see, all children like good stories, happy ending. But nowadays, one big issue is that more of the young generation, when they are spending so much of time on mobile phones, things which are very easy, you can order everything will come to your house. You just do not have that grasp of reality. The resilience part is somewhere, lessening up in the present generation. That's what a lot of people say everyone can have. But when we talk of resilience, increasing resilience in kids, how do we ensure that we use the right kind of stories to instill resilience in our children? What is the best way to do that through stories? Because they are not going out on the ground as much as earlier generations used to go. They are not falling as many times and getting up. Here it's more about a very whole different world altogether nowadays.
Yes. So hopefully they are doing that, falling down and getting back up in some regards, and maybe even in a protected family setting. But let your kids fail. We are so overprotective that we're not allowing them to work through some of their own things. But again, number one for resiliency are those generational family stories. But you mentioned we like a happy ending. Sometimes it's good to tell a story that has a tragic ending, because the thing is again, we can see that life will go on, because sometimes we do fail, sometimes we even choose to fail, like a good, noble, tragic hero. We choose to leave a job. We choose to leave a relationship. We choose to lose a friend sometimes because it's necessary for the greater good in our lives. And kids need to realize that life does come with some losses. And when they can see, especially if you can reframe in your own personal stories, your loss as a win because of why you did it and why you made those choices, and that they were motivated by good values and being a healthy individual, then we can see that, okay, when you lose, It's not the end of the world. And a quick example of this was I had some adult kids in my house the other day, and I said, hey, I'm going to be talking on some podcasts. What stories do you remember when you were kids? And my one child said, I was so devastated in ninth grade when I lost the school election. She ran for like student council, and she was so devastated. And I remember telling her, I don't remember it so much, but she remembers that I sat and told her about when I was the exact same age and I lost a school election by 3 votes and how sad I was. And the whole time I'm talking about this, my child's looking at me going, well, mom doesn't seem like all that devastated about that anymore. Like she looks like she's okay about that. She's telling the story in a way that I'm not crying. I'm not, like, oh no, my life was ruined by this. And she was like, oh, like maybe it will be okay. And then part of the story also was that I went on to high school and I made it into student council and had a lot of fun doing that. And this child also grew up and did the exact same thing. So, but they were comforted and were made more resilient through her loss in that moment because they saw that I had a very similar loss. And you know what? I was okay. So it's those kinds of things. But, don't hand your storytelling off to other people. Like it's so easy because everyone is churning out so much content, right? Social media and Netflix and streaming and just everything. And be careful about just handing that over because there's a lot of stories out there that aren't really healthy or aren't, we have a real trend right now growing towards dark satire, a lot of violence. And I'm not saying that those stories don't have a place somewhere, but if that becomes the main course, the main thing that our kids are consuming, that we take that in. Our brains work in a way with story that we really honestly can't discern. I mean, we can on one level, but there's a deeper level in our brain that doesn't really discern between, is this happening to someone else or is this happening to me? These mirror neurons just take in that story as if it's us. And if we're getting a steady diet of negativity and dark stories, that it's going to affect us. It does affect us. And it's a matter of balance and making sure they're getting the family stories, that they're getting the powerful stories, which for me comes from the oral tradition, the folk and fairy tales, and their kids still love those stories. We think that's old fashioned, but there's timelessness in those stories. And if kids get exposure to them, they love them.
Absolutely. And for those people who are still discovering this whole storytelling thing for the family, what are the ways you would like to tell them, that, okay, this is how storytelling builds connection and joy so that, they can get that double boost of confidence into the power of storytelling within families.
Yes. So if you didn't come from a storytelling tradition, just start somewhere. And sometimes it's more comfortable to tell your own stories in your own voice. If you have the inclination, try the character voices. Have fun with it. Have little repeated rhymes or songs, but you don't have to have that. But there's lots of really cool games that you can do with your kids. So there's many cards that are just like a deck of story starters. They'll ask questions like, did you ever have a time when you broke a bone, or got stitches? Did you ever have a time when you were trying to cook something and it turned out to be a disaster? These things. So if you're having dinner, someone could choose a card and you can go around the table and see if anybody has a memory around that. That's a really easy way to kind of ease into. It's not like this formal story that someone's saying once upon a time and it's going to be amazing. You're literally sharing memories. And once you start sharing those memories, they usually spark more and more memories. But there's all sorts of games that you can play. And I'm just going to pull out my piece of paper that I had some ideas. So you can have these are simple things with small children that work really well. You can have a box or a little bag, and you can throw in any sort of items. They could be little figurine toys or a cookie or just whatever. And the kid gets to pull out the item, and then you're going to tell a story about that. And if you're confident or willing to play along, you could just make something up, or you could make sure you had a story for each of the items that you put in there. Maybe you tell a story together, passing the story back and forth, and they get to choose what happens next with the characters. There's just these little fun prompts and things that can help you start telling. Some people make like a spinner. We're making some of these to put on the Appleseed lesson plans. You just go to byuradio.org and then look for the show The Appleseed, and then we have a For Educators tab. And so we have a lot of ideas in there of ways that you can help share stories. But another fun way is you could give everybody a piece of paper and some crayons or pens and say, draw a time of maybe your favorite thing you did this summer, or it could be any sort of prompt. And then everyone draws a story, draws the story, doesn't tell it, but draws the story, and the best that they can. And then you swap the pictures, and someone else is going to tell the story they think is on your picture, and you're going to do that for somebody else. And then you can swap back and have the person tell the original story if you want. But it's just this idea where we're just getting our minds churning about story, and that we're sharing with each other instead of just staying on our earbuds and not talking. And some of these games can work really well in the car. If you can get everyone off their devices, they're kind of a captive audience. So the car trips are could be a good friend for you.
Absolutely. Wendy, one last question I have is, many a times family dynamics change. A lot of things change within the family. There are heartbreaks, heartaches, relationships go different ways.
Yeah.
At that point in time, children are children, very small. How do you tell them the right kind of stories? What stories should be told to those children? How should one tell them? Who should tell them? Any idea on that?
So this is for small children, but you've had some hard things happen in the family that you need to talk to them about?
Yes, and
Yeah.
if two people mother and father have separated.
Okay, yes. So this is again where I'm saying, let's not shy away from our difficult stories. I think we need to be honest with kids. Kids are so smart. They do not miss anything, I don't think. And so we need to just kindly and with very much trying not to vilify anyone in the story, because if we're vilifying an ex-spouse or anything like that, that just puts the child in a very painful and hard place. So if we can tell our story with being age appropriate for whatever age they are. But again, I think that it's about telling stories about people. So for example, if I had a young child that was very distressed about their parents going through a divorce or a parent dying, I would talk to them about when my father died when I was 8. And I would tell them a few stories about that and how I got through. I remember I was teaching a Sunday school class at church with really young children, and it was Easter, and I was trying to tell them what the glorious message this is a Christian thing, but where we'll be reunited with our ones that have died. And the way I did it was I brought in a book that I had made about my dad. And this is another tip for parents is, see if you can write down and capture those family stories. And I had years and years ago, I had all the cousins in the family who never knew my dad because I was 8 when he died. I told them the stories and they illustrated them. So each child illustrated a different story. And I knew that they would remember their story at least, right, that they had illustrated. And I went through this book and I just told some of the funny stories about things that my dad did when they were little, and the kids were enjoying it. And then I just said, it's Easter, and this is why Easter is so important to me, is that I know, because they could see that I loved my dad through the stories, that I will see my dad again. And those kids were like, what did you do, when you were 8? Because that was about how old they were. And what did you do? And how did you get through that? And I said, my mom, I talked a little bit about my mom. But the funny thing about that story is there were 2 kids in that class who had lost parents who had died. And they were as astonished as any of the rest of them. How did you get through? It took me by such surprise. and really touched my heart. And I'm like, even the kids that have been through it, but they're not adults, right? They're still seeing it through the young child's eyes, and they needed to know that I grew up and I was okay. That's what you do with kids that are suffering and having a hard time. You're honest with them about the time, especially if you can find those times when you were about their age, or have them talk to someone else. Maybe you have a friend or an uncle or somebody that's been through something similar, and just not by talking to them, but by sharing the stories of what that was like for you. You cannot imagine how powerful that is.
Absolutely, absolutely. There is so much to know about stories, Wendy, and I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of parents, educators, and all would like to know more about you, from you. Learn about stories, how to tell the right kind of stories to the children. So, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, the best way is you can always email me. You got my name. It's wendy.folsom@byu.edu. And if you're wanting to make this culture, and you're starting from scratch and you're uncomfortable, go and listen to the stories on the Appleseed. It'll open your eyes to how wonderful stories can be, and you'll go like, oh, maybe I could learn to do that too. A lot of these storytellers are so funny, and I'm not nearly that entertaining, but they still help me see how I can tell some stories myself. And so just read wonderful books and listen to wonderful stories. But best of all, share those stories with the people in your family and get them sharing some of theirs. That's really the ultimate best thing. And just check us out on the Appleseed, Kaboom, Original Audio Adventures, Wink, Stories for Better Bedtimes. Just if you Google those, we are everywhere that podcasts are. And don't forget that we've got those lovely lesson plans that even parents, you don't have to be a school teacher to use them. They teach a lot about emotional management and lots of really great things that would be good for your kids and your own family. So that's just under the For Educators tab under the Appleseed on our webpage. So.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.